All right, well, we should get started. This is James, and he is going to be speaking tonight. I'm super excited. It's an honor to have you. Thanks for coming out. And I'll let you introduce yourself a little more.
Sure.
Tell
Yeah.
us what you got going on. So
Perfect.
thanks a lot.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you so much, Micah, for inviting me. I'm James. I am a new-ish professor at the University of Oklahoma. My background is in entomology, but as all of you here know, if you study insects very deeply, you'll find that the lives of insects and the lives of plants are so deeply intertwined. So at some point, I also became a botanist. I'm not a very good botanist. At this point in Oklahoma, I can probably mostly only identify the plant species and genera that bees forage on. But I'm slowly making my way there, and I really enjoy watching plants. I really enjoy hanging out with my fellow botanists. You guys are all doing very important work just by caring about the plants, because as you know, plants are the foundation of all terrestrial ecosystem. So thank you for being here. Thank you for doing what you do. Thank you for loving what you love. Yeah, for sure. Ah, that's even better.
Yeah.
Perfect.
All this stuff.
Cool. No worries at all.
Everything.
Yeah.
Okay, great.
We start right on seven. They all have to
Perfect. So without further ado, actually, let's let these friends come in first so that everyone who needs to sit down can get a seat.
There's 10 chairs.
When I posted this on our Facebook, people put comments, I have to come to this.
Oh,
Oh boy, I'll be there.
oh man.
No pressure.
Yeah. Nice. Well, hopefully this is what folks have been expecting. So, all right. So, my talk is titled "A Plant's Best Friend Needs a Hand," and the talk, as you can guess, is mostly going to be about bees. I like to drive my presentations mostly using photographic storytelling. So most of my slides are going to be a lot of images, and the practice right now is, if you use someone's image, you give them a copyright. But since so many of them are mine, I'm just not going to copyright my own images so that I don't clutter up the slides. If you happen to see a slide that you really like and you take a photo, doesn't have a copyright, assume it's mine and assume you can use it for whatever purposes you need. Before I start, I would like to acknowledge that the land on which the University of Oklahoma now resides, this is my home institution, is the traditional home of the Hasinai Caddo Nation and the Kiri Wichita and affiliated tribes. I acknowledge that this territory once also served as a hunting ground, trade exchange point, and migration route for the Apache, the Comanche, the Kiowa, and Osage nations. The University of Oklahoma recognizes the historical connection that our university has with its indigenous community. We acknowledge, honor, and respect the diverse indigenous peoples connected to this land. And we fully recognize, support, and advocate for the sovereign rights of all of Oklahoma's 39 tribal nations. All right, so starting from the beginning, yeah, the community of tribal nations here in Oklahoma have been immensely cooperative and helpful to me as I got started learning the different ecosystems and studying how to live in harmony with and restore the land. And I'm hoping to collaborate with them very deeply and immensely in the future. All right, so starting from the beginning, this is the beginning of a plant. And as we all know, for a plant to get to this stage, it needs a father and a mother, just like all other multicellular living things. And how this happens for plants is a bit of a challenge because they are deeply rooted in the ground. They can't go up and walk to find their mate. So how they do this then is to enlist the help of animals that can cover this gap, right? By enlisting the help of pollinators. And so procreation for plants is literally about the birds and the bees. And of course, flies, beetles, butterflies, moths, bats, all sorts of different creatures. As you can see, these are all beautiful creatures. They all look very different from one another. They cover a wide range of evolutionary histories, right? You have insects, you have mammals, insects from very different lineages, but they all have several things in common. They are all strong flyers. If you're a plant, you want someone that flies well, can cover large distances, to carry your genes from one place to another. You don't want an earthworm or a caterpillar. They all also have a strong dependence on flowers for food. So all of these organisms collect nectar for their energetic needs. And others will also use pollen, they will use petals, they will glean flowers for other small creatures that are living inside. So these organisms, they are doing the plants a huge favor by letting them, facilitating their reproduction, but they're really out here for their own selfish gains. And this is really kind of a free and unregulated market system where every player is out maximizing its own profit, but the invisible hand of the market in this case really balances things out, and a tremendous amount of biodiversity can be maintained. And this is one of the reasons why plants have such beautiful and diverse flowers, is to advertise their presence and highlight where the pollinators need to go to be able to find that sweet nectar that is payment for their kind of energetically costly labor of moving the pollen from one flower to another. And again, as you can see in this kind of free, unregulated market, there's a lot of competition for the attention of their clients, and that's why flowers are often, so beautiful and they smell so good. So whereas for us, large mammals, our reproductive organs are private parts, for plants, it's the opposite way around. Now, again, all these different creatures serve as pollinators, and they all have their important roles to play. Many of them have very, very distinct morphology, very distinct kind of body shapes that allow them to best service different kinds of plants. Like, for example, hummingbirds see red very well, and they have a long beak, so they're very good at pollinating these long tubular flowers. Entire dissertation theses and books have been written about kind of the matching between the body shapes of pollinators and the flowers that they visit. So I won't go into that too much detail today. I do want to focus the rest of my time on bees, which are the most important pollinators in most terrestrial ecosystems around the world. And that's because not only do they seek nectar as an energetic source, they're not just out to grab a quick lunch for themselves, but their entire life cycle depends on the resources that are offered by flowers, because their larvae eat basically nothing else but products derived from the nectar that the adults collect and the pollen, that the mom collects for them. So we're going to focus our talk today on bees. So first then, the question is, what are bees? Bees are defined by taxonomists as a specialized group of vegetarian wasps that have branched hairs on their bodies. So if you look at this, you can kind of see the hairs look kind of thick and fluffy. They're not sleek insects for the most part. And here you can see a very fluffy organism, and that really helps them to transfer pollen from one place to another. They, because they belong to the order that includes the wasps and ants, they share this common feature of having a thin, narrow waist. And from an evolutionary perspective, this is because the ancestors of the groups of organisms that gave rise to the bees and wasps are parasites, and they use their stinger to inject eggs into the organisms that they parasitize. So to do that, you have to have a very flexible abdomen, and so having this having a part of your waist basically turned into an articulated joint by extreme narrowing allows your abdomen to have a large kind of radius of movement. And bees do not parasitize anything. They don't lay their eggs in a grasshopper or something, but they still do use this kind of flexible waist to defend themselves. Bees also have flattened hind legs, and the majority of bee species have pollen-carrying hairs on the back of their legs. So the flattened and broadened hind legs give more surface area for that pollen to be carried. Bees also have 2 pairs of wings, which they carry on their back. And that'll be important later. And they have long, rod-like antennae, and many bee species use these antennae to sniff out the host plants that they prefer. Bees also have large, pronounced eyes, but they're not super huge, because bees need to be able to accurately see the landscape to find the host plants that they need to forage on. They need to be able to find their way home, but they don't need ginormous eyes because they're not usually targets of organisms that hunt flying insects, so they don't need to be able to dodge very well. They're also not hunters themselves, so they don't need to be able to chase down flying prey like the way dragonflies do. And also, they oftentimes have striking markings on their bodies, and that's to warn predators not to mess with them. Because in nature, generally speaking, if you're walking around in plain sight and advertising your presence for everyone to see, there's usually a pretty good reason, and bees have a very good reason to not really be that scared of predators, because they can deliver a painful sting. Now, I highlighted all of those features on the bee's body because, as I mentioned earlier, bees are vegetarian wasps. So when you're out there trying to find bees to look at, if you're a beginner, it's difficult to discern whether an insect that's flying around is a bee or a wasp. Now, this here is a wasp, and you can tell that it's got many of the features that are very similar to the bees that I just showed you earlier, but you can tell that these are very unhairy, unfluffy insects. Wasps tend to be very sleek. They also don't have thick, hairy, flattened hind legs. And if you're seeing an organism that's carrying some sort of insect prey, animal prey, you know that that's not a bee, because bees are vegetarians. Here's another insect that looks very much like a bee. As I mentioned earlier, looking like a bee really pays off, because if you're a predator who's been stung once, you're not going to attack something that has contrasting black and yellow stripes again. This is a flower fly, and even though it does a very good job at imitating a bee, and actually repeatedly high-profile publications like Time Magazine and others have put out articles about bees and randomly used a picture of a flower fly instead of an actual bee. That's how good of a job they do. But if you're careful, you'll see that they have these huge kind of orange section-looking eyes because they really need to be able to maneuver very well in the air to dodge all these aerial predators that are out after them. And they have these little stubby antennae instead of long rod-like antennae. They also don't have that wasp waist, and they don't have the broadened, hairy hind legs. And also, flies only have 2 wings, one single pair, and they carry them on the back, usually separately in a flat plane. Okay, so these are just kind of some basic tips for when you go out later and look around your favorite plant species to see what kinds of pollinators are visiting them. You can discern whether the insect you're seeing is a bee or something else by these traits. Most of the time, not all the time. There's a lot of nuance. All right, so now that you know what bees are, how do they live their lives? So before I get into a discussion of the natural history of bees, I wanted to first bring up this organism, which, yes, is a bee. It's the Western honeybee or the European honeybee, or simply a honeybee. And it is one of the most recognizable insects around the world. There was a survey done where they asked people from all walks of life how many different kinds of insects they can recognize. And monarch butterflies, honeybees, and ladybugs were something that everybody could give a name to in their own mother tongue. So very familiar insect. This is one of the most agriculturally important animals in the whole world because they pollinate huge amounts of crops. And they do that because we can fit a lot of them into a tiny box. They'll forage on just about anything. You can move them all around. They're very, very hardy, very resilient species. Very well suited to human management. But this is not a native bee. This is a bee that was imported from Europe to make honey and to pollinate crops. The reason we see these so often is that beekeepers have moved across so many places in the world, and these little girls are such good survivors that they have always gotten out, escaped from captivity, and set up shop wherever they kind of landed. In Oklahoma, they don't seem to be super common. If you go out into nature, in most places you'll see more native bees than honeybees, but in places like Southern California, something like 3/4 of every insect you see on a flower is a feral or runaway colony. But you know, just the fact that it is an ecological disaster in some areas doesn't mean that it's not a beautiful and respectable insect that have a lot of very interesting traits. I wanted to bring this up because most native bees actually do not live like honeybees do. So we all know that honeybees live in these huge colonies with a single queen, and all the workers are either her older sisters or her daughters, and they collect tons of nectar that they make into honey that they store for the long winters. Every individual works really hard. They work until they die, and they defend their colonies very aggressively with stingers. Native bees, on the other hand, the vast majority of the species do not make any honey. 9 out of 10 of those species aren't even actually social to any extent. There are about half the bees out there that you see that actually are incapable of stinging you. And about 1 in 8 bee species actually don't work hard to make an honest living. So all of these factoids about native bees probably contradict what most people would think are the typical traits of the typical bee. So this just goes to show that the honeybee that we're all familiar with is really such an atypical member of the bee family tree. So unlike honeybees, this is how native bees live their lives. So we're going to start with the life stage that we're most familiar with. This is the adult bee. This is the only life stage that I think most non-beekeepers and non-kind of hardcore museum scientists will ever see. I have very rarely seen bees that are not in this life stage. So the mother bee collects nectar and pollen from a flower of her choice. She digs a tunnel in the dirt and makes nest cells, which she often coats with some sort of secretion, and she deposits the nectar and pollen that she collects. And then when enough has been deposited, she shapes it into a pollen ball, and she puts an egg on it. And when the baby hatches, it hatches into this little grub called a larva. And as you can guess, just by looking at it, because our external body parts all carry a function, the fact that it doesn't have any external body parts that perform kind of vital functions means that it really doesn't do anything. This insect baby has one of the cushiest lives of any animal baby in the world, because it is born in this underground temperature humidity controlled chamber on top of this giant food pillow with no threats, and all it has to do is eat this food pillow, and it's got enough nutrients to basically carry it through its entire development into a pupa stage. So they go through complete metamorphosis just like butterflies do. And then the next year when the time is right, the life cycle starts all over again. And I mentioned that most bee species nest in the ground. Many of these bee species can nest kind of anywhere in any kind of soil type. So this is one of them, the Texas striped sweat bee. It looks very exotic and dazzling because it's this beautiful bright green, but it's actually one of the more common bee species here. I just started growing loofah in my back garden, and this bee is the chief pollinator of my loofah plants. Every morning, basically as soon as the sun is up, like I'm seeing them collecting pollen from my loofah. So very resilient. It can nest in all sorts of different kinds of substrate. Not all ground nesting bees are like that. So this here is Swank's sweat bee, and apparently, as far as scientists know, they only nest in stable, exposed loose stand. So basically, like what you'll see if you go like to like a big bend in the Canadian River, for example, those like big loose sandbanks. That's kind of the habitat that they require in order to nest. And actually, a lot of bee species in our area require loose, stable sand dunes, and that's why we really have to pay attention to not just bees' relationships with the plants, but also with their relationships with the underlying geology when we think about native pollinator conservation. Here's another interesting bee that I wanted to point out, called the cellophane bee, and it's called the cellophane bee because the material that the mother secretes to coat her nest cell is chemically basically cellophane. So this bee biologically synthesizes cellophane, coats her nest cells, and she coats it so that she can deposit her food resources. Because in this lineage, the food, instead of being a solid dough ball of pollen and nectar, it's kind of like a more soupy mixture. It's like a minestrone of nectar with pollen grains suspended in it. And you need kind of like a baggie to contain that so that it doesn't just like leach through and seep into the soil. And members of this bee family actually gave scientists some really important clues about the diet of bees. Because for ages, scientists thought, yeah, bees derive all their nutrients just from the nectar and the pollen. But when scientists were excavating the nests of these cellophane bee relatives, not this particular one, but some close relative, they found that these little soupy pockets of food resources that the mother has deposited, it's bubbly and smells kind of yeasty and fermenty. So when scientists documented that, they hypothesized, hey, maybe the fermentation process is doing something to the food resources for that particular species. And then in the last decade, scientists have gone into the pollen provisions across all different kinds of bee families. Those with very solid, kind of sand grainy pollen balls versus those with soupy nectar mixtures, and found that all of them actually are inoculated with all sorts of yeast and other microbes that actually chemically break down the pollen, which is a nutrient-rich but not very accessible source of food. And these microbes are converting this very hardcore plant resource into something that's much, much more easily digestible and much more bioavailable nutrients for the bees, such that if you look at the chemical signature of the bees, they actually look more like omnivores than like pure herbivores when you look at the signature. So that has implications. Not only is this cool because these are not actually just true vegetarians; they're actually like brewers, right? They're making like kombucha down there or yogurt or something. But also it means that if you put fungicides and other kind of pesticides that kill microbes, then bees may have trouble inoculating their pollen provisions with the right kinds of microbes to help break this stuff down. So even if the mother bee is working just as hard, collecting just as much pollen and nectar, it may not get broken down by these microbes to the same extent for their babies to get the full complement of nutrients that they need. So a lot of really cool natural history, but that they all tie together and form a picture for how we can better steward these the environment for these organisms in the future. So the bee species that don't nest in the ground, so I mentioned earlier, most do, but a sizable fraction nest in pre-existing cavities, and most of those pre-existing cavities are in wood, because in any ecosystem that has wood, there are insects that drill through wood and chew a hole out on their way out. These are nesting, as you can probably guess, in a board that scientists had drilled specifically for studying these bees. So these bees, they don't have to labor to dig, these long tunnels in the sand, but they do have to bring in their own furniture to make this kind of rented space more homely. So you can see there are some petals here, there are some leaves. These partitions are made of resin, so different bee species will collect different kinds of plant and mineral material from the environment and use them to incorporate into their nests. And even though there aren't as many bee species that do this, that nest in wood, the species that do have some really interesting characters. So this bee family, the Megachila bee, the leafcutter and resin bees, most of the members of this group nest in wood, And one thing I love about them is that instead of collecting pollen on their hind legs, they collect them on a pollen brush on the underside of their abdomen. And what they do is they'll fly to a flower, they'll land there oftentimes, and they'll just start working, jumping up and down, and they use that pollen brush to just pick up pollen grains off the flowers. And if you look up, if you go to the internet and you search up like mason bee or leafcutter bee collecting pollen, you'll see these great videos of bees just like landing on a flower and twerking on the flower head to collect the pollen. Do I have a circle? Yeah, I have a circle there. And another thing that I like to joke about is that in the world of bees, it's the ladies that have hairy bellies or hairy legs. And here's another bee that nests in these narrow wood cavities. This one often nests in pithy stems. This is a masked bee, and this bee is interesting. And I mentioned earlier, right, that those rules of thumb that can tell you whether it's a bee or a non-bee insect, they work a lot of times, but for some groups, it's really hard because if you look at this, you can't really see any hairs at all on this thing. And that's because this bee is really very well adapted to living in very, very tight, long, narrow spaces. And they don't need hair because they transport pollen by swallowing it into their crop. And then they go home and they regurgitate it. So they don't need any hair sticking out on their bodies to retain that pollen that they carry. Also makes these guys very difficult to study. Here's another bee that nests in cavities in wood. This is probably a familiar bee species because I think out here in the eastern half of the U.S., these ones actually become kind of pests in certain areas. They'll drill holes in your house. They'll drill holes in your lawn furniture. And this ability of theirs to use their very strong jaws to chew through solid wood can actually cause a problem for plants as well. So as you can see, this flower isn't even blooming yet. This bee is visiting this flower because it has chewed a hole into the corolla tube, and now it's sipping nectar from a flower that hasn't even opened. And this again is an illustration of kind of this tension in the mutualism between plants and pollinators. The plants are always trying to pay as little as they can to get the pollinators to do as much pollen as possible. The pollinators are always trying to do the least amount of work to get the most resources out of the flowers that they can. And nectar robbing, this is what the scientists call this behavior, is one of these consequences, is when a bee has the ability to get nectar for free without being loaded down with this heavy, gluey pollen, they'll do it. So this is the nest of a large carpenter bee. Sometimes they'll drill a hole, again, like straight into wood. But if they can find like a agave stalk or something with a stalker inside, they'll also use that and just make a series of cells. These are larvae with their pollen balls. You can tell that this is the oldest one, this is the youngest one. And you can see that they divide the pollen balls, with a wall. This wall actually is made using the sawdust from excavating this stem, mixed with nectar and other secretions from the mother bee. So here's another factoid for you. For those of you who are DIY nerds, it's the carpenter bee that invented the particle board. Here's the last cavity nesting bee I wanted to show you. This is the small carpenter bee. It looks very ant-like if it's on a flower and you can't see the wings very well. The body proportions really are very ant-looking. And again, it's a smooth and shiny bee because it lives in these very narrow, pithy stems. And the reason I always showed this bee is because it has a very interesting life history. In most species that scientists study closely, they find that a female bee would often make sure that her first offspring is a daughter, and she would purposely underfeed that daughter so that when that daughter is born, she's kind of like half the size of normal member of this species. And then the mother bullies this daughter into going out and foraging and feeding basically her baby siblings. And this daughter, because she's so much smaller, she can't fight back. She just has to do what the mother says. So really, this is like a real life Cinderella story, except the prince never comes. So it's really sad for this dwarf daughter, but not from an evolutionary standpoint, because the scientists have found that that this dwarf daughter that does this work to raise her baby brothers and sisters, actually those nests are much more successful than nests where they had artificially removed this Cinderella daughter. And so by raising her brothers and sisters, she's actually improving the opportunities of her own genes being passed on through her brothers and sisters. And that is especially true in bees because sex is determined differently in bees, wasps, and ants compared to almost any other group of organism. So for us humans and other mammals, our gender is determined by our sex is determined by our sex chromosomes, right? XX is woman, XY is man. But for bees, it's determined by how many copies of your entire body's chromosomes. So if you hatch from an unfertilized egg, you're a male bee. If you hatch from a fertilized egg, you're a female, which means that which means that this daughter bee, daughters from the same mom and same dad will share not half of their DNA like human siblings will. They actually share 75% of their DNA. So actually, this Cinderella bee, she is more related to the little brothers and sisters that she's raising than her own daughters. So this is one mechanism through which scientists think so many bees, wasps, and ant species, well, in fact, all ant species have developed this kind of animal society where full-grown insects act as workers in a colony and do not reproduce themselves, but rather serve a sister or serve a mother who is the queen and laying the eggs. And that's why, even though it may seem shocking that most bee species are not social, knowing that even just 10% of all bees are social, that is a huge number, a number that's way higher than almost any other group of insects. And social colonies of bees look like this. So honeybees have these, perfectly hexagonal frames, or not frames, sorry, like wax combs. But in bumblebees, it's a much more messy affair with kind of pots of wax of various sizes, depending on how big the workers are when they that have made them. Bumblebee colonies are also different from honeybee colonies in that they last only 1 year. So even though they do store some amounts of nectar, they're only storing it long enough for the same bees to be eating them and feeding some to their larvae. They don't store over the winter. The queen dies at the end of the season, late summer, early fall. And the next generation of queens, her daughters, will come out, mate, and then go hibernate somewhere by themselves, and then start the process all over again. So even though bumblebees are social species, they have a queen, they have workers. The queen, once she raises her workers, does not go out to work by herself. In fact, this species starts out as a strong single working mom. Every queen has to find her own nest, make her own wax pots, raise her first 4 or 5 daughters, kind of foraging hard by herself before the nest is strong enough for the workers to then be sent out, and the queen can then retire by herself, where she can just lay eggs inside a colony. So this life history where a single queen can mother hundreds of workers in a good situation makes bumblebees some of the most dominant bees in the environment. I think oftentimes if we go out and we see a nice blooming bush, you'll see that it's covered with bumblebees. But it also means that there are a lot of vulnerabilities in this very complex life cycle, right? The queen needs to be able to find a mate, fatten herself up, find a predator-free and pathogen-free hibernation spot. She needs to detect the right cues from the climate to know when the flowers are blooming in the environment. She needs to find a nest site that is close enough to all the different flowers that she needs to be foraging on. And then there needs to be flowers throughout the season for the colony to survive from spring to summer, the production of new queens and new males in the fall. So perhaps for that reason, a lot of bumblebee species around the world are in decline. And we here in the state have 2 such species at the very least. There are some that we haven't been seeing a lot. This Southern Plains bumblebee is one that is classified as endangered. We also used to have this thing called the variable bumblebee. It's it hasn't been seen, I think, anywhere in the United States, at least for 50 years now. Oklahoma used to be kind of the last bastion of its existence. So my team is right now trying to trying to find bumblebees all throughout the state. Hopefully we can see this one, see the variable bumblebee again, but we don't know when it's going to happen. Sorry? This here? This is partridge pea.
Okay.
Yeah, one of the bumblebee's favorite plants. So if you want to save bumblebees, plant partridge peas. And plant flowers, yeah. Other than bumblebees are only true social bees here in North America are these sweat bees. So if you're outside gardening and you see a small bee land on you, kind of walk around and hang out, oftentimes it's a member of this group. And you can see this one here. You can actually see her tongue sticking out, licking my finger. And that's because insects, just like us, they need electrolytes, they need water on a hot day, and human sweat is enough for these tiny little guys. So they'll do that. In the deserts, I find that they do that a lot more. Here, I've only had this happen to me a few times. Okay, so about half the bees out there can't sting you, and that's because about half the bees out there are males. The stinger is a modified egg-laying organ. It's the ovipositor, or the tube through which the egg slides come out of the body. And since males don't lay eggs, males don't have that organ, and therefore males can't sting. But I also want to say that bees have a bad rap for being aggressive and stinging. But the thing is, in encountering a heavily armed person when you break into their home is a very different story from running into that same person at a large grocery store, right? So a lot of stories of people being stung and chased by aggressive bees is because they've stumbled into the bee's colony, right? If it's a honeybee, they've gone too close to the hive. If it's a bumblebee, maybe they're nesting in your utility box and you opened it and freaked out. Someone's attacking us. That's when they're going to aggressively attack you. But if you're just out in the wild, even if you're in a flower meadow, there are tens of thousands of bees all around you. At that point, their mentality is that, hey, there's someone threatening next to me. Let's go attack them, right? Your orders of magnitude bigger than they are. If you bother them, they're gonna be like, wow, okay, I guess I'm gonna have to go somewhere else. So yeah, I always tell kids, like, be careful not to step on them. Don't grab them with your hand, but if they're out foraging, you can put your face right up to them and see how they collect their pollen, see how they brush their antennae off, look at their tongue sticking out to lick at the nectar. These really are very docile, if not maybe a little bit like flighty when you encounter them working out in the flowers. Oh, by flighty, I just mean that some of them are very skittish. They're very, very skittish. Like you get close and they're just gone. Bumblebees and honeybees, not so much. Like you can even pet them and they don't really care. All right, so this last factoid, how do bees complete their life cycle if they're not working hard, constructing a nest, collecting pollen for their offspring? Well, the answer is they can be like a cuckoo bird and go find a nest that has already been provisioned with pollen or nectar and lay their egg in it. This kind of life history has arisen multiple times in multiple bee families. So it's a pretty successful strategy, right? Like 1 in 8 bee species has given up a hardworking lifestyle and decided to do this cloak and dagger thing. And as you can see, because it has lost the behaviors that are typical to bees, it's also lost some of kind of that morphology, that appearance of an honest, hardworking bee, and it looks a lot more like a wasp. And therefore, bees that are parasitic across many different families, I feel like they all look kind of evil, like they're up to no good. But it's always exciting to see them because you generally only see large numbers and species of these parasitic bees if you have a very healthy native bee community for these parasites to be able to gain a foothold. So it's always fun for biologists to see them. And there's a lot of really cool evolutionary and natural history questions that can be answered by looking at this kind of behavior. All right, so now you know all these cool factoids about the way native bees live, so you're no longer surprised by how different they are from honeybees. I have one bonus factoid I give this talk to various different groups, but for botanists, like I feel like you really would enjoy this, which is the fact that some bees are really, really picky eaters, and it really takes a very diverse and healthy plant community to support all the different bees that we have in the ecosystem. So here in Oklahoma, Helianthus, this is the genus that like is really, really important for supporting a lot of pollen specialists. So when a bee is super picky with respect to what kinds of plant they will collect pollen to feed their babies, we call them pollen specialists. So the largest sweat bee in North America, that's a sunflower bee. There's an entire bee family here that, as far as we know, at least in this part of the world, all feed on members of the sunflower family. This cute little dark spurred minor bee, it's a Helianthus specialist. And then not just Helianthus, but many other different members of the family Asteraceae have specialists. So even the thistle has a specialist longhorn bee that only collects thistle pollen. And actually, this is really cool because thistle flowers, they're kind of difficult to work, right? Like they're just columns everywhere, and the pollen is at the very tip. And a lot of bees, when they land on it, they don't really know what they're doing. They kind of gingerly kind of wade through all the different anthers and like try to probe their tongue in. But this bee, she is born to collect pollen from this, and you'll see if you get to see her, see the species in the wild, they'll dive into a thistle flower, they'll just swim through it. Like they know exactly how to move themselves through the network of anthers, and they collect pollen super quickly. And that's what being a specialist allows you to do, is to be very, very good at handling a flower that has a very specific morphology.
What's the little critter?
Oh, the little critter is a true bug of some kind.
What?
A true bug. A nocturne of some kind. Yeah. Here's another one. I think Pyropappus is called desert chicory, right? Is that what it is? The common name? Yeah. So desert chicory, common roadside weed. This is there are several different minor bee species and one sweat bee that only goes to desert chicory as far as we know. So Asteraceae is very popular with bees in part probably because of how many species there are and how abundantly they bloom all across the blooming season. Other plants that are very prevalent in the landscape oftentimes have specialists too. Actually, there was a recent study that came out based in the eastern US, but basically they found that the plant species that are likeliest to host these picky eating bees are the plant species that are most dominant and most reliably found in the environment. So things like willow, this plant has several different bee species that are specialized on it, like this sandbar willow bee here. Monarda is another one that has a lot of specialists. What's really interesting is we have, half a dozen or more species of Monarda in our state. Almost all of the Monarda specialists are specific to only Monarda punctata. So I don't know of any specialists that will only visit Citriodora or Plenopodioides. There are one or two that are specialists of Fistulosa all the way in the east. I've been looking for those bees and I have not found them, even though I found really nice patches of Monarda fistulosa. So there's some interesting biogeography going on here that we're still trying to figure out. So even this wine cup mallow, there's two specialist bees. I've only been able to get photos of one. The other one is much rarer, much more difficult to find. Even tiny little flowers that don't seem like they have a lot of resources in them may have specialist bees. So this is Croton fairy bee. So this is Croton texensis. So you know how tiny the flowers are if you know that species. This is a puny little bee. And again, it's also a sand nesting specialist. So you really get on your hands and knees to be able to see them. People think oftentimes when I give talks to more kind of like garden clubs or farmer groups, people often think, well, great specialist bees that, these are for environmental enthusiasts, people who like wildflowers, like, what's in it for me as a crop grower, right? But when specialist bees are the same species that pollinate native crops, they can actually be economically very important. So the squash bee, they are up pollinating pumpkins, zucchini, and squash, and other kinds of squash before the sun is even up. And if you happen to have nice enough habitat to support good populations of these bees, you don't need to bring in honeybee or bumblebee colonies. These guys have finished the job and pollinated every last one of your zucchini flowers in a multi-acre field before the sun has hit that horizon. So they can be economically very important. Blueberries and raspberries likewise have specialist bees that only either exclusively or almost exclusively collect pollen from those. And because of their oddly shaped flowers in the Ericaceae, those specialist bees are way better at transferring pollen than the honeybees are. Now, given the great plant diversity we have basically all over the world, one thing that is more surprising to me actually is that only a minority of plant species actually, and plant genera and even plant families have specialists. So this is probably a familiar plant to you all, Stenaria nigricans. Very hardy plant, very beautiful, lots of great flowers, lots of great pollen. No known specialist bee, and we don't really know why. Even though this is an abundant plant, it's a very reliable plant. If you specialize on it, if you develop kind of the biochemical machinery to subsist off this pollen, surely you can do very well for yourself. Why are there no pollen specialists for this, but pollen specialists for poppy mallow? There are hypotheses thrown around, but we don't really know for sure. Again, germander, prolific bloomer, found in all sorts of habitats, pretty disturbance resistant, favored by many bees, including this endangered resin bee, and bumblebees love it too, but no specialists. A lot of generalist bee species, so those that will thrive off many different kinds of plant species, they will collect the pollen, but no one's kind of cornered the market on saying, like, this is all I'm going to eat, the way that is the case for many of the other plants that we showed just now. So don't know why, and there's a lot more work that needs to be done on this. And I just want to leave you with this one. This is Nama Stevensii, and so we have two Nama species in our state. Nama Stevensii is the gypsophilic one that only grows on gypsum outcrops, and Nama hispida, I think, is one that grows in non-gypsum but kind of xeric, sandy, rocky outcrops. And these two Namas each have a different specialist bee. And this, as you may know, like if you've been up on this, is not a common plant at all. You really have to have really high quality gypsum outcrops that have not been disturbed too much if you want to find this plant. And yet, on this very rare plant, very tiny plant that doesn't really even have that long of a blooming season, there's a bee that's decided, like, yep, that's all I'm gonna eat. There's all this other stuff out there, but I'm gonna eat that, and this bee can't occur anywhere else outside of there. And actually it's gained the ability to actually tunnel into gypsum crust. So it's basically like excavating rocks in order to be able to make a nest near this host plant that is decided it's all I'm gonna eat. So if you want to find this bee, this is, as far as I know, this is the first photograph that was taken of this bee. It's very, very tiny. If you know the size of Nama flowers. If you want to find this bee, go in mid to late May to Gloss Mountain or to Alabaster Caverns Park and look for exposed kind of gypsum rocks, and you'll find flower, and if you're patient enough, you'll also find the bee. All right, so the next segment of the presentation, why do native bees need your help? One of the reasons that I always say yes when people ask me to come talk about my research is because bees need our help, and the more people we inform, the better. And I especially love giving talks to naturalist groups because you guys are here because you love nature and you have a desire to see nature flourish, right? It's so you guys are, of course, naturally ready-made allies for me to recruit, basically. So I think the news media at some point has made it kind of sound apocalyptic that oh, we're losing all our bees and all the ecosystems are going to be destroyed and we're not going to have any more almonds left. It's not quite that bad. The honey beekeeping industry did suffer a lot of setbacks back when colony collapse was happening. But again, that's one species. It's a commercially important species, but that's one species. The problem that faces the rest of the bees, of which there are 3,000 to 4,000 in North America, about 20,000 or so in the entire world. These are very different kinds of problems. So it's not like bees are dying en masse everywhere. It's more like species are more sensitive to perturbations in their environment, are starting to drop out of habitats that they used to occupy because of the way we've been treating their habitat and the way the planet has been changing due to our actions on it. So one example is we have these beautiful meadow habitats in Oklahoma, and more of it is turning into habitats like this, this habitat is nourishing to all sorts of organisms. These two are very nourishing to a very small subset of organisms in our environment. It's not that bees can't survive in these kinds of environments, but we certainly won't get all these different bees, right? Especially the ones that are, that like I just showed you, have very close association, very frequent beakers that will only feed from plant species that themselves maybe are intolerant of conditions like this. So the more we can protect natural habitat, keep things looking the way they look, the more we can ensure that these species and the plants that they service can exist in perpetuity. And now another added complication is that it's not just the habitat, right? We can protect habitat if we work hard enough. This is a much harder problem. A changing climate that brings about a lot of extremes, right? So when we talk about global warming, a lot of people's first reaction is, how much is it heating up? Oh, it's heating up by fractions of a degree, like every few years. Like that's not a lot, I think a much more immediate problem right now is that with a changing climate comes more frequent and more severe extreme climate events like droughts, like unseasonable snowstorms, like floods. So in Oklahoma, for example, I haven't been here very long, so I don't have any experience for the historical trends, but I have been told that that storms are getting more severe. We're starting to get more and more like weird freezing events and hails. Storms are more damaging, and there's more and more of a concern about drought. And there are folks that used to be able to do agribusiness in certain parts and reliably expect to have harvest because of the climate patterns. Now they can't expect that. They have to change the way they do their growing business because of changes in how the climate is bringing risks onto their crops. It's more like gambling and less like planning for them now. So this is something that's very hard to fight. And as I showed you earlier, different bee species divvy up the different plant species by being active at different times of the year and by feeding on different plants. When you have a drought year that knocks out a lot of plants in the environment, we don't actually have a strong idea of what's happening to the bees during that time. I've done a little bit of study on it, but it's really difficult to study bees when the best way to find bees is look for flowers, and you have a year where there's no flowers. So there's a lot for us to learn still. But one thing that we do know is that if you have a very large habitat that contains a lot of variation, so if you have big boulders where whatever little rain falls can slide off the side and collect in a little gully beneath the boulder. If you have a large continuous tract of natural habitat that has a small creek, these places are going to be more buffered from drought. If you have a tornado that tears through and decimates the entire tract of land, if you have very good habitat immediately surrounding that, then whatever has survived in those surrounding habitats can recolonize, right? So one of the problems right now when we chop up their habitat and degrade it is that it really hampers the ability of these natural organism communities to recover. So that's one of the reasons I think now more than ever, conserving habitat is important in the face of this potentially inhospitable climate. Bees, like other organisms, can adapt. They are hardy. They have one generation or more per year, so they can probably keep up with a lot of this, but we've got to give them enough habitat. So, and reversing this decline of bees, I think, needs to happen both from a top-down and a bottom-up process, right? So, as scientists learn more and more about the impact of pesticides, the impacts of certain ways of treating the soil or building homes, like for example, certain pesticides that we now know are less effective and more harmful for beneficial insects have been banned in various different countries in favor of other pesticides that potentially are just as useful but less harmful for pollinators, right? That takes top-down regulation based on data, but that often happens very slowly because I think for good reason governments are reluctant to go out and tell people what they can and cannot do, especially if these things have to do with their livelihood. So in the meantime, while scientists are still collecting data that can show regulators this really is the best way forward, I think now is a good time for everyday community members like us to do what we can. So how can you help? I know I'm running a little bit late. I'm very sorry. And if you need to go, I will not feel offended. You can restore habitat, and this is something that native plant societies are so good at. So I'm so psyched to be here and to learn among all of you, like how do we do better to protect our native plants? How do we strategically put native plants into people's hands and convince people to grow them on their ranches, in their front yards, their backyards. Another one is to be informed about what Save the Bees means. So I just told you today that this is not the bee you save. This is the least endangered pollinator in the world. And I'm not bashing honeybees. That's me. I have a lot of respect for honeybees, and I've worked with them. They are so valuable from so many perspectives, but really the media has done us all a disservice by conflating saving honeybees and saving pollinators in general, right? So like if today I come in and I have a shirt that says, save the Angus, you know that I'm an animal rights activist. If I have a shirt that says save the bison, you know I'm an environmentalist. And right now there's no difference for the bees, right? If you have a honeybee shirt on, they can't tell if you're an environmentalist or an animal rights activist. So it's up to all of us who know the difference to inform our friends, inform our policymakers that, hey, the honeybee industry needs help. They need the research funding. They need the human resources to study how do we better take care of this organism that we brought from Europe and are now under our care, and now do so much of the heavy lifting of our agriculture. But we still need to set aside funding and resources and publicity to save the pollinators that are not these guys, and that have a very different and arguably just as important ecological role to play in our environment. So if someone comes to you and say, hey, help us save the bees, you tell them which bees, you tell them the right bees to save. And then the last part that I'm really excited about, who knows this website, iNaturalist? Can you raise your hand? Yeah, I knew it. Okay. So I don't have to explain what iNaturalist is in too much detail, because if you don't know what it is, all those people who raise their hands will be very happy to show you how it works. Because iNaturalist is is just so cool. You can basically anyone can take pictures, upload them to the internet, and it forms a living database of where different species occur in the landscape. This used to be the exclusive job of naturalists, right? And like most ordinary citizens will only know the species that they themselves encounter, or they have to go into an encyclopedia or some sort of scientific text. But now anyone can know what plant and animal species occur where. Like if you go on a hike and go, oh, what plants are around me? You can literally pull up iNaturalist and it'll tell you, hey, you can see 120 different kinds of flowers within a 5-minute walk of this trail. We're doing the same thing for bees, and I'm working on a study right now. This is the local contribution of iNaturalist data, broken down 40-kilometer grids all throughout the US. So, I mean, there are still places that have no bee data coming from iNaturalist. These are generally places where there aren't people who live there. There aren't really major roads that cut through, or if there are roads, there's no stopping points for people to come out and do some naturalizing. But this is an incredibly good job that iNaturalist is doing. And here's us. Darker colors are more records. So, you know, the OKC metro area, we're doing pretty well compared to the rest of the country. And I have an ambition to like make us a really dark and well-covered state. And we can show people like, yeah, you know, like we know bee conservation in Oklahoma. And just to give you a frame of reference, if we talk about contemporary bee data, so data from the last 20 years, because a lot of insect data come from the heydays of entomology, you know, decades and decades ago when scientists are just starting to explore, you know, these new ecosystems. Here, again, the darker colors are a higher percentage of the data. So many parts of the US, including much of Oklahoma, these are very dark colors, which means that there aren't a lot of bee specimens out there collected in museums by formal scientific studies. Because Oklahoma has traditionally been a state where the agribusiness has been ranching and pollinator independent crops, right? So when you go out and you take photos of bees on iNaturalist, take photos of bees and you put them on iNaturalist, you are really contributing super importantly to our knowledge of which bees occur where, which bees are actually endangered, which bees are actually not the targets that we need to be pouring money into. And when I start writing species of conservation reports for ODWC, and they look at, you know, the data out there, we will be using iNaturalist data to come up with the species and habitats that are most critical for immediate conservation needs. So anyone who takes pictures and puts them on iNaturalist will be participating in this effort of us allocating to make sure that the funds go to the right places. Yeah.
Interrupt, but it, while we're on, so I'm saying that it's just average as a cover debate on our passion line. You should upload that, or should we hold out more exotic?
No, you should upload anything you see. I know that I personally am very bad at taking photos of the common things. Just because there's only one of me, I don't have enough time. But the more people take photos of the common things, the more we're sure that they're very common. There actually are some phenomena on iNaturalist where, for plants especially, when people are trying to figure out like plant phenology data, like when's the peak bloom, for a lot of things, you get a lot of artificial inflations at odd times because botanists are going out, oh yeah, of course I saw this yesterday, blah, blah, blah. And then in December, they see a sand plum blooming. They're like, whoa, what the heck? And they take a picture. And then everyone who passes by that, you know, like 0.05% of sand plum that got confused and bloomed, they're, whoa, what the heck? And they take a picture. And then suddenly there's a big flip of sand plum blooms in December. So that phenomenon exists. So the more people can kind of unbiasedly take photos of anything they see, the better we can get a sense of what's actually common and what's there. Yeah.
Bring up December. I mean, is it just all summer and fall is this, or is it?
So I have collected these in all months except for January. Yeah. If there are flowers around, there's a chance. And if there are flowers around and it's more than like 55, 60 degrees, there's a chance that some bees are going to be out there. Yeah. And of course, you know, this is all this is all out of the goodness of your own heart. Like no one can force you to do this, but I can tell you that if you do and you upload these photos, like they will be used by scientists. And the last thing I want to say about iNaturalist is that not only are we able to get some, good data, this photo, it does so much more than a specimen on a pin in a museum drawer, right? There are things you can do with a pin specimen. And as someone who has a job right now, because I've sorted through tens of thousands of pin specimens, I can tell you that they have their uses. But like this, you can see the organism in all its natural glory, doing its thing. You can see how it's folding its legs. You can see even the flower that it's visiting. This gives us a lot of data that a specimen won't give us. And the best thing is, this bee can go out and forage for her queen, for her little sisters, and live a productive life without her life being curtailed for research. And I think that's a win for everybody. And I also think it's a win for everybody when the local community of nature enthusiasts can be empowered to look at their own data and draw their own conclusions about the biological resources that they have in their neighborhood, and they can join the conversation about how best to do with this. And I think a world where conservation is really keeping up with the conservation needs of the organisms takes every member of the community, because we have decades of history showing that helicopter science, where scientists are dropped into a place, collect some data using the limited time and funding that they have, then they go, and then years later they send a white paper to that community saying, and this is how you should do things. That has a very limited ability to make long-term transformative changes for conservation practice. All right, so just some tips about how to take bee photos. Very, very different from taking plant photos because bee will fly away. Always have your camera with you. That's very easy these days. This bee photo was taken with a camera that's even older than this one. This is the first known photo of this very rare bee genus, and I only had it because I was doing pumpkin pesticide field work in my postdoc. I was like, ooh, that's the whole spine of a super rare bee. Let's see if the super rare bee is there. Grab my phone and it was there. Right, so you'll miss 100% of the organisms that you don't have a camera to capture. So always have your camera with you. Very easy these days. Find plants that bees like, and in different ecoregions, those are different plants. Generally speaking, large, beautiful flowers, you'll be able to expect at least a few different kinds of pollinators on them. Find busy plants. So if there's a big patch of plants with lots of things going on, chances are you can go spear off 90% of the stuff and then still have 10% of the things left to photograph. And starting from the easiest things like busy plants will give you a sense of how much motion a bee can tolerate and how quickly you have to press a shutter, to give you a better sense of how to work your photographic device, so that when you find that rare bee on that odd lone plant out there, very ready make your shot count. Spend some time on small flowers, so like this Proton texensis that I showed you. Even small flowers sometimes can have very interesting pollinators. And also look for preoccupied bees, right? Like these two on a date. The female is also even collecting pollen still. So this is I guess like a dinner date. She's not flying away in a hurry, and I was able to get very close to these two. This is a more technical one. Shoot as you approach, and then shoot until the bee leaves. So this is not a great photo. This is not a great photo. This is a great photo. But I had no confidence that I was going to get close enough to get this photo before the bee flew away. So what I do is, if I use my phone, actually any device I use, if I can see kind of the general gestalt of the bee on my viewfinder, I start shooting and I keep shooting as I get closer and closer and closer. And I delete 95% of the photos I take. And that's the great thing about having digital cameras is that, you're not wasting that many electrons when you delete a bunch of photos. Take photos of different angles because different body parts are diagnostic for different species. So, like this one shows the front of the first segment of the abdomen very well. This one shows the back of the thorax very well. Like different body parts will carry different information. And sometimes you can only tell what species a bee is based on a composite of different views of the body. So when you upload to iNaturalist, they don't limit how many photos you're allowed to upload. So don't just choose like the one prettiest looking shot. If you have different shots, even if they're slightly blurry, that show different parts of the organism, upload all of them because they might all be helpful. Document interesting behaviors, like this bee coming out of the nest. I actually have a good friend who led a team to comb the internet for photos of bees perched on flowers or leaves with their tongues sticking out and a drop of nectar dangling off their proboscis. And it used to be hypothesized that it's mostly female bees that do that because they need to concentrate the nectar to a certain concentration to use in their pollen ball provisions so that it's not too watery. You know, it has to be the right concentration to like act as a preservative and hold the ball together. But then in that study, they combed through all these pictures and they found that male bees are doing that a lot too. And it's not just the groups of bees that use very concentrated nectar in their pollen balls. All sorts of bees do it. And that's evidence that, you know, even the male bees, they don't want to be carrying around all that water weight when they don't have to. If a concentrated ball of nectar will keep them full and fuel their flight without weighing them down a lot, it's beneficial for even the males to do that. So a scientific publication just from people having documented these cool natural history behaviors. I think it's fun if you can claim a spot and go to it regularly because then you know the phenology of different plants that bloom throughout the season. You know which species to expect. Oftentimes, you actually even see different species from one year to another. The literature is full of examples of different communities of plants and pollinators coming out and changing in dominance from one year to the next. There are a lot of different interesting dynamics that go on there. So if you have a spot that you go to regularly, you become an expert in all the different animals and plants there. Charles Darwin did a lot of that in his own backyard. So, and also, last point is that photos don't have to be perfect. This is a photo that I would never print out at even a tenth of this size because of how blurry it is. But it's good enough for you to for a bee biologist to know. Oh, hey, you know, a minor bee of the genus Protandrina is active in mid-October, and the thing that it forges on is that lawn aster, that Symbioticum. So even photos that are not aesthetically super pleasing can be useful for science. All right, so the last thing I feel like is important for us to do, and I feel like I'm preaching to the choir here, is to share your love for nature with others. So a wise man once said, at the end, we will only protect what we love, and we will only love what we know, right? And there's a lot of people who really, it's not that they don't care, and not that they lack love, it's just that they lack the exposure, they lack the knowledge of just like how amazing it is, all the wildlife, plants, animals that we have, and how dire it is, the situation they're in because of all these pressures that are on them. So I think it's very important to, any chance we get, to spread the love. Every person we convert is a person who can potentially go out and make a difference. These are my own kids, and as many opportunities as I get, I take them out, and they both love looking at flowers. My daughter knows a bunch of plant scientific names, and it's hilarious. Right? She'll come in and like, hey, when is the Syringium going to bloom next year? I actually took her to look for Syringium pods, and like, it's really sad because all the fields we know of with good Syringium, like when the pods mature is exactly when the city comes and mows. So if you have tips on how I can get Syringium to grow in my lawn, please let me know. Sorry? Blue-eyed grass.
Oh,
Yeah. Blue-eyed grass, Syringium. Yeah, I really. My daughter's favorite color is dark. Yeah, her favorite color is dark blue, so like she really wants it. So, all right. So with that, I have a lot of people and agencies to thank for various different kinds of support. This is not a one man effort. It takes a village to learn about and to teach about bees. So I'm grateful for all these individuals and agencies. And of course, I'm very grateful for all of you for being here. Thank you again, Micah, for inviting me. this is how you can contact me if you would like to find me in the future. And I'm happy to answer any questions. I know that I've gone quite a bit over time and I'm sorry. Yes.
So we live right down the road and festival and pollinator garden are front and back.